Hello, I'm Bob Ackerman, the editor-in-chief of Signal Magazine, and welcome to our Signal Media Executive Interview. Our guests today are Judi Dotson, Executive Vice President, Booz Allen Hamilton, and Brian Green, Senior Vice President, Booz Allen Hamilton. Judi, Brian, welcome.
Thanks, Bob. It's great to be here.
Thanks, Bob. Absolutely.
Okay. Tossing out my first question, the intelligence community has undergone some significant shifts over the past few years. What challenges do you see facing the IC?
Well, I'm happy to start, Brian, and you can feel free to chime in as we go.
Sounds great.
I guess we'd start with what hasn't shifted in the core mission. So what hasn't shifted is the need for us to understand what's happening in the world and deliver that information to the right leaders so that they can make the best decisions. But in that context, what has shifted are the approaches that are available to gain that understanding. So specifically the use of AI and other emerging technologies. And these technologies, as we know, change the game. And with that comes some big challenges. So as an example, we know that the technologies enable speed and that adversaries are moving quickly. They're integrating technologies into their operations, and we need to do the same. We also know, just most recently in the news, events like SolarWinds show us that we have to continue our focus on the nation's critical infrastructure and make sure that we have full awareness of what's happening across that. And then generally, the interconnectivity of these technologies present all kinds of interesting cyber challenges and broader Internet of Things challenges. So, while the technologies are enabling, they certainly bring with them their own challenges. So I was thinking about this discussion today, Bob, and I was reflecting on a report that just came out. It was put out by the Center for Strategic International Studies, and it was recently published, called Maintaining the Intelligence Edge. Now, in full disclosure, I'm going to just admit that Booz Allen was grateful to have the opportunity to co-sponsor this study. Having said that, I think it's a great study, and we don't claim full credit for everything that's in it. It was created by an impressive list of really bipartisan thinkers. I think that's important to say today, bipartisan thinkers from across the IC, and it does a great job of really framing the challenges as well as offering some recommendations. And the report started, the summary started with a statement that just struck me. It said, "The IC stands at the dawn of a new era of technological innovation and transformation unprecedented in its history." So I think that's powerful. And when you think about this era, we're really transforming both the nature of the global threats that the IC needs to assess that are enabled by these technologies, as well as the IC's ability to detect and assess them. We know that rapid technology and insertion is needed, but as important, we need to be thinking about the big transformation that comes with bringing all these things into our operations and the cultural change that needs to be embraced to make all of that happen. So I'll pause there. I know you have more questions to get to, but those are some of my opening thoughts.
Brian, your take on that?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. And Judi, I think you hit on some great points. I mean, I think when you think about challenges, my framework often is sort of people, technology, and operations, right? I mean, so, Judi touched on a lot of challenges in all of those categories. And I think, it's important, it's as important on the people side, right? And the process side around culture changes, right? And the need for the workforce to really pivot towards some of the newer technologies, right? So obviously the technologies, Bob, are going to have a tremendous impact, both as challenges, but as opportunities in the intelligence community. I mean, you think about things like artificial intelligence and adversarial AI and deep fakes and really being able to figure out what is true, right? What is ground truth in the data that you're seeing. I mean, that is a huge challenge. I think there's also a challenge, and Judi, you mentioned SolarWinds, right? the ability for the intelligence community to effectively share information with the defense industrial base, with the DIB, with other critical infrastructures, right? How do we take classified threat intelligence, classified information that we're getting, and be able to effectively share it, declassify it, that sort of thing. And that's really an operational process and technology challenge all in one. And so I think there's some really thorny things that we're going to have to work through as an intel community here. Many of them are spelled out in that report that Judi referenced, which is really a tremendous publication. So I'd encourage your readers to look through it.
You mentioned the workforce. What about the workforce? It's aging, getting cleared talent. One topic that's been discussed is clearance reform, especially since a lot of people are going to be working from home. Clearance is another issue. What do you say when you look at those issues and wonder how we're going to address them?
I think the workforce component of the cultural change is just one element of it. It's real, right? But as we think about what needs to happen, there are long-standing proven approaches that we've used for years across the IC that are going to need to change. And that's really uncomfortable. But if we don't take that risk, it will be difficult, if not impossible, to get where we need to be. So it's broader than the workforce. There certainly are some skills that are going to be needed in this new future, that it's not just the IC's challenge. The world needs to gain stronger skills. And as you mentioned, Bob, if we could have access to a broader talent pool as we think about security clearances and where the work needs to happen and the kind of resiliency that we can bring to it, that gives us more opportunity to bring the right talent to the fight. But also things like acquisition reform and really driving innovation and creating a culture of innovation are things that are going to have to be considered as we move forward.
Well, Judi, you just talked about shifts in technology, and now you've just mentioned the criticality of workforce training and adopting advanced technologies. Brian, let's look at that issue. What technology advancements do you see in the IC over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think there's a handful of them that are going to be extremely influential, right? So, you hear a lot about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and I'd say AI ML is probably one of the driving forces behind a lot of the change that we're going to see in the intelligence community and really across DoD and critical infrastructure as well, right? So across sort of all phases of the intelligence process, I mean, from collection, analysis, distribution of intel, I think you can see applications of AI and ML algorithms really changing the game, right? From how we collect, from how we task sensors, that sort of thing. Booz Allen, I think there was a press report out in January. We supported the Air Force, and I think the U-2 Dragon Lady aircraft, we had an application of AI on the aircraft, which was the first time that AI was used as part of an operational mission, right, to complete a complex mission. It's sort of an AI co-pilot. While the pilot's flying, the AI is controlling the sensors, right? So, that was a really watershed milestone, I think, in the use of AI that we're going to see in the intel community. You can think about other things too. We've been working on an AI radio, and one of the things that I do as part of my role is oversee a lot of our 5G work. And that's another technology I'll get to in a bit, but we've got an AI radio that's able to sort of sense the RF environment and to deconflict. And you can think about covert communications applications of an AI radio, and you can also think about, as we're doing out at Hill Air Force Base, how do we help deconflict spectrum between Air Force radars and 5G communications. So I think AI is really one of those technologies that's going to be tremendously game changing. Bob, I mentioned 5G is another one. I think in the communication spectrum, 5G is going to change our communications a lot more than we think, right? It's a lot more than enhanced mobile broadband and just faster cell phones. We're going to see a proliferation of Internet of Things, IoT devices. There's going to be massive amounts of machine-to-machine communications, a lot of data processing at the edge. And so the coupling of those two, 5G and AI, I think will really impact the Intel community sort of on both sides of the spectrum. I mean, you can think we've got sensors everywhere now. Every endpoint is a sensor that can be tasked and you know, intelligence gathered from it. But you know, it's also going to provide tremendous amount of processing at the edge for us. So I think those are two of the primary technology changes. You know, there's others that I think are going to impact the Intel community. You think about advances in biometrics and you know, identity and access management. You know, as far as our human capabilities as a nation and our adversaries as well. I mean, there will be some denied human areas of the globe just because of the amount of you know, facial recognition capabilities that are available, that sort of thing. So you know, I think those are some of the major technological changes. We can talk about quantum computing and the rollout of cloud and other things as well. But you know, those are the things we've been focused on.
With 5G, you've described what a boon it will be for moving information around to and from the people who are supposed to be part of it. Adversaries are also going to be using 5G. What kind of opportunities might it present for the U.S. and its allies to be able to gain access to intelligence through 5G that other people are doing?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities, and as you mentioned, it's, you know, certainly two sides to the coin, right? I think there's sensors everywhere. You know, 5G has highlighted some of the supply chain issues that we have, right? And so, you know, those are things that we are concerned with. But you know, on the other side of the coin, as you mentioned, a lot of the adversaries and you know, all nations are going to start rolling out 5G networks, and in fact, I think some of the infrastructures that maybe have not been as modern can catch up very quickly with 5G deployments. And so, you know, there's opportunity for the U.S. to expand, if you will, the you know, coverage area and that sort of thing of you know, the communications that we're looking at it in foreign space. And you know, I think there's all sorts of opportunity that we can take advantage of to rapidly process that information at the edge and as I mentioned before, make some very quick decisions using AI and ML algorithms.
Okay, well, Judi and Brian, we have just been talking about the challenges the intelligence community is facing and the rapid changes in technology that are going to help solve some of those and create others. Now, what innovations and recommendations do you see as being critical to helping the intelligence community stay ahead of the threats?
Yeah, so Brian just talked about some of the innovations, and I'll go back to where I started the beginning, which is creating the environment that will enable the innovations to come to fruition. So I thought of, as I think about this question, I think about the journey that Booz Allen went on when we stood up our strategic innovation group. And we needed to deliberately establish an innovation roadmap and a framework and our culture, just decide what our culture was going to be. And some of the lessons that we learned are similar to what I'm hearing from the IC community that I'll just foot stomp. And the first is really to lead through collaboration, not to go at it alone, to make sure that we're developing partnerships with our allies, but also across the industry, across the different agencies of the IC, because these are hard problems. These are some of the hardest problems faced anywhere that we need to solve. And so I think leading through collaboration and making sure that that is the culture is very powerful. The second thing I'd say is there's so many problems to solve. We really need to focus the agenda. I mean, if we tried to solve everything at once, I'm not sure. I know in my experience, it's hard to get anything done when you're trying to solve everything at once. So focusing the agenda on the most complex problems, making sure that there are priorities and making sure that people are aligned against them. And then the third thing I'd say is now is the time for inspiration, being an inspirational leader. You talked about the workforce, you talked about the challenges. We know in the world today that the workforce needs to be retooled, reskilled in many cases to take advantage of the full technologies. Let's do that. They can do it. We can, they just need the right training, and then inspire them to go off and be market catalysts and come up with the right solutions. So those are the three things that I think about in terms of recommendations.
Ryan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Judi. And as Judi, as you know, we've invested pretty heavily in some of these new technologies, and I think the partnership with industry is going to be critical for success, right? And so, one of the examples, I talked about 5G, we talked about AI. And I think there's still a lot to learn as far as opportunities and risks and vulnerabilities and that sort of thing. One of the investments Booz Allen made is recently in a carrier grade 5G mobile core and edge compute nodes that we have in our Central Maryland offices, and that's going to give us the opportunity to really test out some use cases and learn a lot about this new technology and network that we've been hearing so much about. So that I think that the focus there and the partnership with a lot of our clients is really going to help the overall community. And I would say, Booz Allen's certainly not the only one investing in the area. I know we are heavily. There's a lot of universities around that are investing in these technologies, and we try and partner with the likes of University of Maryland and others to make sure that we're staying on the cutting edge. And I think sort of that partnership, public-private partnership, if you will, is going to be critical to success in dealing with some of the challenges ahead. Judi talked about really the culture and the workforce transformations, and I think those are really critical. And sometimes we fall too much into our the ruts and the way we've always done things, and some of the technology we talked about with artificial intelligence and machine learning, and a lot of those, these technologies, they're programmed by humans, they're algorithms written by humans. And if we think about it, if you don't have the right diversity of thinking and diverse workforce, you are going to be stuck in sort of a single-minded set of algorithms, right? And really that's going to be detrimental to us in the long run if we don't think about sort of the non-technical aspects. Think about the workforce, think about diversity, think about culture, that sort of thing. I think that's going to be critical in success as well.
And
that's
the risk,
I think about Bob.
I mean, right, the risk,
absolutely,
right? Encouraging smart risks. Clearly, we don't want to be reckless, but got to have the right incentives in place to encourage that risk taking and reward it.
Let me toss one at the two of you. Open source. With all these technologies we've talked about, there's going to be a lot of material available open source. Open source is about to undergo the same renaissance as communications and information technologies. Do you see open source intelligence as becoming the dominant type of intelligence in the near future?
Do you want me to start, Brian?
Please.
I think with all the information that's out there, there's no avoiding it. I think open source information is valuable. It comes at such speed to us. I don't think we've harnessed it, the power of it yet completely. And we have to be thoughtful in how we do that. But I think it's an advantage. And I think we're going to need to take advantage of it going forward.
Ryan?
Yeah, absolutely. I would add on the one of the challenges I alluded to earlier, the whole idea of deep fakes and the importance of being able to tell what information is real, right? And how do you validate and corroborate sort of the provenance of the information that you're getting in open source. And so I think, to your point, you're absolutely right. There's going to be so much open source data available. from a volume perspective, you know, to be able to process that effectively and efficiently, it will be a tremendous boost to our intelligence capability to focus on all the OSINT. I think we have to be careful though and sort of balance that with the ability to validate, you know, as our AI engines are making decisions very quickly, right? How do you get that validation in line, right, with the process to make sure that we're, you know, we're not being played, if you will, by the adversary with some, you know, false data, that sort of thing. So, you know, there's some issues to think about before we sort of jump in with both feet, but yeah, I think it's going to be an advantage in the future.
Okay, well, on that note, Judi and Brian, I want to thank you for your insight and observations. To the audience, I want to thank you for viewing. This has been a Signal Media Executive Video. Good day.